Hey everyone, this is Rosie, and today I'll be sewing the Bellezza handbag by Bagstock Designs. So let's get started. This bag can be made in two sizes, either as a tote bag or a handbag, and both sizes are included in the pattern. I will be making the handbag size, which is 12.5 wide by 10.5 high by 4 inches deep. Now the skill level is advanced, but I think if you have good, strong, basic sewing skills, you should be able to make this pattern with no problem. I will be following the pattern instructions very closely with maybe just a few minor changes. And I will show you everything step by step. Now this is a PDF pattern, so when you go to print it out, you want to make sure that your printer is set to 100% or actual size. And then there is a registration square that's 1 inch square. So you want to measure that from side to side and top to bottom, and if it measures 1 inch in both directions, then your pattern has printed out the correct size. And the other thing you want to remember is, since there are two sizes in this pattern, you want to make sure that you print out the correct pieces for the size that you want to make. And she does tell you within the pattern instructions which pages to print out for which size pattern you want to make. Now let's take a look at the materials that I'm going to be using for the bag. A nice thing that the designer does is give you these little tags that you can clip on the pieces. And on those little tabs, she tells you which fabric you need to cut and how many. And I do recommend that you use these little tags because there are a lot of pieces to this pattern, and those tags are a nice way to keep track of everything. So the fabric right here on top is for my contrast, and it is a linen blend. Every single one of these pieces has been interfaced with Woven Fuse 2. Then I have these pieces right here, which are going to be for my exterior. It's also a linen blend, and each one of these pieces has also been fused with Woven Fuse 2. And lastly, I have all of my lining pieces. These are 100% cotton quilting fabrics, and each piece again has been interfaced with Woven Fuse 2. In addition to the Woven Fuse 2, I will be using flexible foam interfacing from Pellon, and that will be for the front and back exterior and for the exterior gussets. I will also be using some Decoville Light for the closure flap on the front pocket of the bag, and I will be using some Pellon 911F, which is a fusible fleece for my handles and my shoulder strap. I will be using some number 5 and number 3 zippers. You can find this information in the pattern instructions. She tells you the sizes of the zippers that you will need to use. She also tells you what hardware you'll need. So I have my hardware here, and I have a little closure lock for the front exterior pocket flap. You may see me using a chalk wheel. This is one of my favorite sewing tools. I'll definitely be using some fray check and some double-sided sticky tape. For my thread, I'm going to be using the Gutermann Mars 70. If you've seen my videos, you know that this is my favorite thread to use. It's a heavier weight thread, so you want to make sure that your sewing machine can accommodate it. And you will also see me using a friction pen. Again, use this with caution. I mostly only use it for the lines that I'm going to cut on. You will see me using it in other areas of the bag in the video, but it's only for demonstration purposes, because while this ink will disappear with heat, it comes back with cold. We're going to start by constructing the front pocket for the exterior of the bag, and this is the one with the flap. So the first thing that you want to do is take your ruler and find the center of that panel there, and you want to draw a line straight down the center. Then you're going to mark a line out from the center towards each side that's 1 1/4 inches away from the center. Now remember, I'm doing the handbag size, and she always gives you the measurements for either the tote bag or the handbag. So make sure that you're using the correct measurements. And if you look at your pattern instructions, you'll see that she gives you the tote bag measurement first, and then the second measurement she gives you is for the handbag. After you mark your lines, you're going to fold back on the lines that are closer to the outer edges. So you can see right here, this is my mark. You just want to fold this back, and then you want to go ahead and press it down really well. And you'll do that for the other side also. Then after you've pressed that, we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from each folded edge. Here's the front pocket, and I folded back on those lines that I drew and pressed everything, and now I'm just going to top stitch at about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And I will use a stitch length of 3.0, and you do want to back stitch at both ends. So here's the top stitching on that first fold, and then we'll just flip it over. We're going to top stitch on the second fold. Here are the folds after they've been top stitched, and this is what it looks like on the other side. Now we want to draw 2 more lines, so I'm just going to turn the piece this way, and we want to measure in 2 1/8 inches from each edge. Now that we have those lines marked, you want to take the piece and the folded edge with your top stitching, you want to bring that up to the line that we just drew. So match that folded edge right up to the line there, and we're going to clip it. I'll match up the bottom and clip that. You'll do the same thing on the other side, and after you have both sides clipped into place, you want to go ahead and press everything. So we're going to press this down, and then after everything is clipped into place, we're just going to baste along those edges to hold those pleats in place. I pressed the pleats, and we're looking at this from the wrong side, so we're just going to flip it over and baste right across the top to hold everything in place. And you want to do this about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And then go ahead and baste in the other side. Here's what your pocket should look like after you've basted in the pleats. You have the pleats here. This is what it looks like on the back side, and this should measure about 7 inches across. Now I'm going to put in my lock. And before I do, I just want to secure this area up here where I'm going to be cutting some slits with some Decovil. The Decovil has been fused into place, and next I marked the placement for my lock. So I measured 1.5 inches down from that top edge, and then I found the center of the panel, which is right here, and I made a cross mark. And now I'll take the little plate that's going to secure in the lock. I'm going to place it right in the center of that line. And then I have to figure out where my legs are going to go, and it looks like they're going to go into the second hole from each end. So I'll just take a pen and mark those slots right there. So that's the second hole in from the end. So I have those marks, and I can double check and make sure the spacing is correct, and it looks correct. So I'm going to take a seam ripper, and I'll stick it in the end of one of those marks, and then you just stick it in and push. Now you want to make sure that you don't go past this mark right here. You need to stay within these bounds. You'll do that for both of them. It is easy to slip, so just try and be very controlled when you do this. And then once I have those legs cut out, I'm going to put the legs of the lock into those slits. Just like that. And then you'll take this plate, put it over the legs, just like that. And then I like to start by pushing down the legs with my fingers, and then I'll take a hammer and go and hammer them down. And once you have the hardware secured, you can take another piece of Decovil and fuse it on top of the hardware, and that will protect the fabric from the hardware. The next step will be to take the front pocket lining panel, and you want to clip the top edge of this to the top edge of your pocket. And then once it's clipped, you're going to sew this with a seam allowance of 1/2 of an inch, and I'll probably use a stitch length of about 3.0. Then once that's all sewn into place, you're going to flip everything with the wrong sides together, and then we'll top stitch right along the top edge. Now I'm sewing the lining to the pocket front, and I'm using a stitch length of 3.0 and a seam allowance of 1/2 of an inch. And you do want to back stitch at both ends. And now that that's sewn, you can just go ahead and press your seam open. And then after you have it pressed open, you're going to fold the wrong sides together, and we're going to top stitch straight across the top here. Everything is all pressed into place, and I'm going to do the top stitching. I'm going to use a stitch length of 4.0. Depending on the fabric that you've used, you may have a little bit of bulk in here. And you do want to back stitch at both ends. After you do your top stitching, you want to baste along all 3 sides, so the 2 sides and the bottom, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Now you're going to take that pocket and you're going to place it on top of one of the top exterior panels. And you just want to center it, and the best way to know that it's perfectly centered is to take your ruler and then measure from the edge of the pocket to the edge of the panel on each side, and they should be the same distance on each side. If not, you'll just go ahead and adjust it a little bit. Once you know it's centered, you can take a few pins just to hold it in place, and then you're going to baste down one side, across the bottom, and up the other side. You want to make sure that your bottom edges are all even. And I'm going to go ahead and baste my pocket in place off camera. These are the pieces for my flap for the front exterior pocket. This is the lining piece, and you want to take your lining and you want to fold back on that long straight edge 1/2 of an inch and press it down. Then this is the piece for the front of the flap. I've interfaced it with a piece of Decoville Light instead of the fusible fleece. And then I took a second piece of Decoville Light. I just cut out a little square, and I put it right here in this area where my lock is going to go, because I want to reinforce this area when I put the lock in. And the line that I drew around there is just to help you see this piece a little better. Now you want to take these 2 pieces and place them right sides together. You want these top folded edges to be even. It's more important for these edges to be even than for the edges down here to be even. And you're going to clip all the way around. And then once you've clipped that, we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew these 2 pieces together, following around the contour of the Decoville Light. And we'll do that with a stitch length of 2.5. You'll want to back stitch at both ends, and we're just going to follow the contour of this the best we can. So you want your needle to be just outside the edge of the Decoville. And if you need to pivot, you can go ahead and pivot, but only take 1 stitch at a time. Once you feel that you can make it around the curve, you don't have to stop. You can just keep going. After you have the two sides of your flap sewn together, go ahead and make some V-shaped clips all around both of these curves here. Then I flipped it over and I ironed open one side of the seam. And now that I have that done, I'm just going to go ahead and trim this down to about 1/4 of an inch. And you want to clip through both layers. And then after that's all clipped, you can go ahead and turn this right side out. I like to get my finger right in the rounded corner and push. And then you want to use your fingers to roll the seam out. You want to make sure that the top of the seam is right there at the edge. You can also take your point turner and go ahead and smooth it out with the point turner as well. Just be careful not to poke through your stitches. Then once you have everything looking good, you can go ahead and press this really well, and we're going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. We're stitching around the entire perimeter of the flap with a stitch length of 4.0, 1/8 of an inch away from the edges. You do not have to backstitch at the beginning. You want to step with your needle down and pivot. Go slowly around the curve. And then just go back to where you began and back stitch over your original stitching. Now we need to set in the other half of the lock. So we need to have an opening that is about the size of the opening that you see right above my finger here. Now I have a set of dies, and what I do is I go into my set and I find a size that's just about the same size as what I need to cut. And I can also put that die over that opening to see if it would be the right size. And this one seems to be about right. Then the next thing that we need to do is find the location for the lock. And I've already done that here. I just used my chalk wheel to make 2 marks. And where you see the crosshairs, that should be the center of the lock. So you want to take your little die and you're going to put it down so that the center of those crosshairs are right in the center of the die. And then I'll use a hammer to cut out that die shape, but I am going to put a little piece of wood underneath so that I'm not hammering into my mat. So now I have it all set up with the little wooden block underneath, and I'll just take my hammer and I got most of it out, and I can finish. Oh, nope, I actually got it all out. So there's the opening for the lock. And now that I have the hole punched out, I can take my lock and just see if it'll fit through the window. And it will. But the other thing is we have these 2 screw holes here, and we need to make a space for those screw holes. So to do that, I just take my little round punch here, and I'm going to make 2 holes just a little bit away from where the circle is. And you want to do 1 on each side. Then once I have those 2 little holes punched out there, I can go ahead and place my lock in there, and then I can take the back plate, put it on, and then I'll put in my screws. Now, before I do that, this is really when you want to use your fray check. So I'll go ahead and put fray check on both sides of this. So on the front of the flap, oops, I put on quite a bit there, and on the back. And once that dries, then you can set your lock into place. Once you have that lock screwed into place, you should not see any fabric through that opening. And using those dies for cutting out the holes for your locks is really the best way to go. Now that the flap is done with the lock installed, we're ready to sew the flap to the panel here. You need to draw a line that's 3/8 of an inch above the top edge of the pocket. Then you'll take your flap and you'll place the straight edge of the flap right on that line. And you'll measure in from each side. You want to make sure that you have equal distance between the edge of the pocket and the edge of the flap. And you also want to make sure that your lock is in line with this half of the lock right here. And once you have everything centered really well, go ahead and pin this in place, and then we're going to sew a line of stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge and 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I'm sewing the flap on with a stitch length of 3.5, and you want to back stitch at both ends. We're stitching in 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the pocket. After you're done stitching in that first row, go ahead and stitch in another row 1/8 of an inch away from your first row. And you also want to back stitch. And there's the flap all sewn into place. I'm working on the exterior back zippered pocket. These are my lining pieces, and we can set those aside for right now because we're going to install our lock. This is going to be the front of the pocket, so when you're looking at the bag, this is what you'll see, this fabric here. And then this fabric is going to be the back of the pocket. So when everything is sewn together, you'll see this on the front, and you'll see this when you go to look inside of the slip pocket that we're going to create. Now the reason why I'm explaining this is because you need to put the snap on the part, on the piece of fabric that is going to be facing the exterior panel. So here is my exterior panel, and when everything is sewn into place, this piece is the one that's going to be facing the exterior panel. If you're using the same fabric for the front and back pocket, then you don't have any issues with this. But because I'm using 2 different fabrics, I just wanted to explain why I'm putting the snap on this piece. So I've already marked the location of where the snap needs to go. And you're going to install this in the same way that we put on the lock. You're going to take the little washer. I've marked the location for my snap. I'm going to put the center of that snap right in the crosshairs, and then I'm just going to mark my legs. After you've marked the position for the legs, you can go ahead and take a point turner again, and you just want to open up those slits. Once you've opened up those slits, you can go ahead and take 1/2 of the magnet and place the legs through the openings. And I'm placing the male side on this part right here. And you can see that I actually did put a piece of Decovil here to strengthen everything. Then you'll take your washer, put it over the legs, and open everything up and hammer it down. Then after you have everything hammered in place, I like to take another piece of Decovil and fuse it to the top, and that will protect the fabric from the hardware. After I have the snap in place, I take that piece and I put it right sides together with my exterior top panel, and I want to center it. So I put it down and I measure the distance from this edge out to each side. Make sure that it's centered. You also want to make sure that the bottom here is centered. And then I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm just going to color in that nub, and I press it down and it gives me my green mark right here. So this is where I need to install the other half of the snap. So I go ahead and take the washer and I put the circle right over my green mark, and then I can mark in those legs there. And you also want to have a piece of Decovil right on the other side of this mark, which I'm going to do right now. I didn't put it on yet because I wasn't sure where it needed to be, but I'll put it on right now. Now I've used that Decovil to the back for strength, and I have my legs marked so I can go ahead and open those slits. And then after the slits are open, you can just go ahead and take the female part of the snap, put the legs through, and put your washer over the legs. You'll hammer everything down again, and you want to put that piece of Decovil on the opposite side of the hardware. The way I do my zipper tabs is a little bit different than the pattern instructions. I'm using a number 5 zipper, so the zipper tape is 1 1/4 inches wide. So I cut out my zipper tabs 1 1/4 inches wide by 2 inches long. And then I take that zipper tab and I clip it to one end of the zipper, and then I go ahead and I sew that with a 1/2 inch seam. Then after it's sewn in, so here's the one on the other side, it's been sewn in with a 1/2 inch seam. I pull it this way, and then I take this end of the tab and I match it up with the end of the zipper, and then I fold it over this way. And once I've done that, I go back to the sewing machine and I top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge here, and that should catch the bottom half right there. Here is the zipper with the tabs all sewn in, and now we're ready to sew this to our pocket pieces. So I'll start with the front pocket piece, and you want to center this zipper right in the middle. So you want to take your ruler and measure both ends to make sure that they're the same distance from the outer edge to the zipper tab. And you can just go and clip those in place. Now that I have the zipper centered, I'm just going to take my lining piece and clip it to the opposite side of the zipper. I have not sewn in that zipper yet. I'm going to sew both of these pieces in at one time. When you're sewing in the zipper, you want to sew from one end of the panel to the other. We're not stitching just in the area where the zipper is. We're sewing straight across. And we'll do that with a stitch length of 2.5 and a seam allowance of 1/4 of an inch. And back stitch at both ends. When you get to where the zipper pull is, you just stop with the needle down, raise up your presser foot, and pull the pull past the presser foot there. And then you can finish stitching across. After you're done stitching, you're just going to take both the front and lining sides. You're going to put them wrong sides together. You want to press this area right here really well, and then you're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this edge. Then you'll go ahead and take the side with the snap and clip that to the opposite side of the zipper. Make sure that you have your snap at the top. You want to make sure that all of your edges are even, so you want to be even with the edge of your zipper tape, and you want all your side edges to be even. And then you can go ahead and pin the lining to the opposite side of the zipper and sew everything the same way we did the first side. I have everything pressed now, and here's the lining side. I'm just going to go ahead and do that top stitching. So about 1/8 of an inch away from each edge, and I'm going to stitch this with a stitch length of 4.0. And do back stitch at each end. And then once you're done with that side, you can go ahead and do the top stitching on the opposite side. After the top stitching is done, just take your piece and put the lining sides together. Match up all of your raw edges along both sides and the bottom. Clip everything into place, and then you just want to baste around the 3 sides. So down one side, across the bottom, and up the other side. And I'll do that with a stitch length of 3.0, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. So now I'm just basting the pocket along all 3 sides. Now with the pocket done, I can just snap it into place on the back panel. Make sure everything is lined up. You want your edges to be parallel to your outer edges. You can do that just by taking your ruler and measuring everything out. And then you just want to baste this down 1/8 of an inch away from the edge all the way around. And I'm going to do that off camera. It's time to install our handle connectors, and I've put the 2 handle connectors here on the back with the zippered pocket. And I'm going to do the ones for the front on camera. The first thing that you want to do is take your handle connectors and draw a line straight down the center. And then you're going to fold the long edges in towards the center on both sides, and you want to press everything really well. After you've done that, you need to mark down 1.5 inches from the top of a connector, and I'll do that with my chalk wheel so that you can see it. Then you'll take each one of your connectors, and you want to put some double-sided tape down along the length on each side of that connector. And you'll peel off the paper. To start, I only peel down a couple of inches. And you'll go ahead and take your hardware and slip the hardware through the top, and right where you made that mark, so there's the chalk mark right there, you want to fold back on that line, and then you can go ahead and take off the rest of the tape, the paper, and secure that down. Then you'll take your front panel or your back panel, whichever one you're working on, and you want to mark a line that's 2 3/4 of an inch in from each edge. So I've already done that. I just took my ruler, I lined it up with the edge here, and I made my mark 2 3/4 of an inch in from the edge. And this is the line right here. Then you're going to take the connector with the tape on it, and you want this edge, the outer edge of the connector, to go right along that line there. So just line it up and press it down, and the inner side of the connector should be covering the edge of the pocket. So go ahead and put your connector on the other side, and then we will go ahead and sew this down. We're going to stitch this in with a stitch length of 4.0, and we'll be doing 2 rows of stitching. The first row of stitching is just going to be 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and you want to back stitch on both ends. And I have a little white chalk line here, which is where I want to stop. And I'll pivot, sew across, and then I'm going to back stitch over that to give that area some strength. And then I'll pivot and go ahead and sew down the other side. And now that we have that first row of stitching done, I'm going to go ahead and stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Then you just want to go ahead and sew in all 4 of your connectors exactly the same way. Take your exterior bottom and place it right sides together at the bottom of one of the top panels, and you're going to clip it all along the length. And once you have it clipped, you're going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam, and I used a stitch length of about 3.0. So I've already done the back panel. Here's my bottom panel all sewn into place. Once I finished sewing it, I ironed everything with the seam facing the bottom. And then I went ahead and top stitched 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. After this is all completed, you'll take this panel and you'll place it on top of your foam. Make sure everything is laying nice and flat. I like to clip it all around the edge just to keep everything in place. And then you're going to go ahead and baste this down about 1/8 of an inch away all the way around and across the top. And I'm going to do that off camera. I have the foam basted into both of the panels now, the front and the back. I used a stitch length of 4.0 for my basting, and then the only other thing I did after I basted everything together is I ran another row of top stitching 1/4 of an inch away from this edge here. I'm sewing together the exterior side panels. These panels were interfaced with Woven Fuse 2, and then I basted a layer of foam over the Woven Fuse. The bottom panel was also interfaced with Woven Fuse 2, and then I have 2 layers of Decoville Light for my stabilizer, for that bottom stabilizer. And then there's a piece of foam basted over all of that. So you'll take your side panel, clip it end to end here. So the side panel's being clipped to the bottom panel. And then you're going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam. after you sew that down, I've already done this side, you want to iron that seam up towards the side panel here. And then you're going to do a double row of top stitching. So 1/8 of an inch away from the edge and 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And I'm going to go and finish mine now off camera. Here are my side connectors for the D-rings. I'm using some cork fabric for my connectors, and I drew a line down the center with my chalk wheel. And then I put some double-sided tape on each long edge. I'm going to peel off the paper. And then you want to fold each one of those long edges towards that center chalk line. Try and get it right on the line there. And press it down really well. Then you can go ahead and press down the other side. Then after that's in place, I have my other connector here. This is the side where the edges are meeting, and I put some double-sided tape on each end. You don't want to put any in the middle. So I'm going to peel that off, and then take one of your D-rings and slip it on. And then we're going to fold each edge towards the center. So each edge towards the center here. Just like this. So this is what it looks like now. This is the opposite side. And once you have that done, you need to take your exterior side panel. You want to mark down 1 1/4 inches from the top edge. So I'll do that with my chalk wheel. And then you want to find the center of this panel. And then I'm going to mark the center. So now I have a little crosshair here. After that's marked, you want to place your connector with the fold right here, right on this chalk line. So I've put some more double stick tape on my connector, and I will just lay it down and try to center it. And then we'll go over to the sewing machine and stitch completely around the connector here. I'm stitching the connector on with a stitch length of 4.0, and I'm starting right here at the top. Now, if you have a narrow foot or a zipper foot, that's a good foot to use when you're putting on something like this. But if you don't have any of those, I'm going to show you how you can get around it. Because the problem is you have the hardware here, which is very bulky, and a presser foot on any machine is going to have trouble with that area. So now that I'm at the end where I want to pivot, I'm going to lift my presser foot, and I'm actually going to stitch backwards for a few stitches. And that moves my presser foot away from the hardware. So now I can just turn and continue sewing, and the back of my presser foot is not going to get hung up on the hardware. And I'm stitching approximately 1/8 of an inch away from the edges. And then when I get back to that top row of stitching, I'll pivot and then I'll continue to sew over that original line of stitching and back stitch across. I I did put in 2 rivets, and I'll show you how I marked the placement for those. So here's the other end. I took my ruler, I marked in 1/2 inch from the edge, and then I marked in 1/4 of an inch from the bottom and 1/4 of an inch down from this line of stitching right here. And then I just punched my holes and put in the rivets. I'm not going to do that on camera because it depends on what kind of equipment you have. I do have a rivet press, so I did use that, but use whatever method you have for putting in your rivets. I've also placed some rivets in the handle connectors, and the placement was just 1/2 of an inch below the top stitching here. Now we're ready to put in our exterior gusset. So there's a couple of things you'll need to do. You want to find the center of your panels. And then the other thing I did is I did some stay stitching, you can see it right here, around the curve, and I just clipped in up to that stitching. And this is about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Then you also need to find the center of your bottom panel, and you'll match up your centers. And to start, I like to put a clip on each side of that center mark. Then I'll go ahead and match the top of the gusset with the top of the panel and clip that in place. And then I'll clip down to where my curve is. Right now I'm just putting in a few clips along the way, but I tend to put in a lot of clips before I go to sew. Then I'm going to go from the center out towards the curve. And then when I get to the curve, I like to clip from the panel side, and I just push that panel right into the gusset there. And it should fit right in. Especially with those little clips. Those little clips will help everything to ease right in there. And then you'll go ahead and clip the other side exactly the same way, and then we can sew this in. I'm sewing the gusset in. I'm going to use a stitch length of 3.0 and a seam width of 1/2 of an inch. And backstitch at both ends. And I'm sewing from the gusset side. Make sure that everything is laying flat as you go around your curve. The exterior gusset is sewn into one side of the bag, so I always like to check and see if I have puckers anywhere. And once I'm confident that everything looks good, I'm just going to go ahead and trim this seam down 1/4 of an inch. Then after you trim down your seam, you can go ahead and sew in the other side of the panel exactly the same way. And here's how the bag looks now with both sides of the gusset sewn in. So now we can work on the lining. We're ready to sew in the interior zippered pocket into the lining. So you want to refer to your pattern instructions for the placement of the lines to create a box. And this is the box that we will be creating right here. We're going to sew entirely around this box, and then you want to have these lines drawn right down the middle and the little arrows out to the corners, and these will be the cutting lines. So after we sew the box, we're going to cut on these lines right here to make an opening for the zipper. Then the next thing I did was I took one of the bottom panel linings and I drew a line 1 inch down from this top edge right here, and I found the center of the panel. And then you're going to take the facing and you're going to place this long straight edge along the line that you just drew 1 inch down from the top and match up the centers. Then you can place in a few pins to hold everything in place. Now we need to prepare the interior zippered pocket. So here are the 2 pocket lining pieces, and here's your zipper. You want to take the zipper and place the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the fabric. And the wrong side of the zipper is the side opposite of the zipper pull. So go ahead and clip that in place all the way along the length. And then we're going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch seam. So now I'll stitch around that box with a stitch length of 2.5. You just want to stay on that line the best you can, and there's no need to backstitch. When you get to the end, you'll just pivot with your needle down and stitch across. And pivot again when you get to the other end. And now you can finish stitching by stitching over some of this previous stitching to lock everything in place. Then take the pocket lining and stitch 1/4 inch away from the edge of the zipper tape, and I am going to back stitch at both ends. The zipper is sewn in here on one side. So now you'll take the other panel and you want to again place the wrong side of the zipper onto the right side of the fabric, and you'll clip this in place and stitch again with a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to do that off camera. After the other pocket lining is sewn to the other side of the zipper, open everything up and you want to press the panels away from the zipper. So once everything is pressed, your zipper should be laying flat. Essentially, your seam allowances are being pressed towards the bottoms of the panels. Then you want to take the panel that we sewed this facing to, and we're going to cut that opening. So you'll take your scissors, and I like to just start with a little snip right down the center there, and then I cut to each end. and then I cut to the corners. Now you want to make sure that you cut up to the corners but not through them, and you'll do that on both sides. And then when you're done cutting, you can go ahead and open up the other side. And this is another time when I will use some fray check. So I'll just put a little dot in all four corners. So finish opening that up. Once you've cut open your opening, you want to iron back your seams, and these little triangular tabs need to be pointing to the outer edge. Then you can start pushing your facing to the other side. And when you do, you want to make sure that that seam line is laying right at the top there. So go ahead and push this all through and iron it down in place really well. My opening has been neatly pressed into place. Here's what the facing looks like on the opposite side. Now I want to take that panel with the zipper, and I ran some double-sided sticky tape on both sides of the zipper. The placement of the tape is right underneath the stitching lines. So I can take this now and place it in my window. I'm only going to remove one side of tape at a time. I go ahead and just position it so that that zipper is right in the center of my opening. You can just take some time to play around with it to get it to be exactly where you want it to be. And then after I have the top side in place, I go ahead and I remove the other paper from the other tape, and again center everything. Now I'm going to take a little bit of time to play with this off camera, but once I'm done, we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch all the way around the edge of the box. And I'm going to keep my zipper pull out here. I'll start around here, sew around, and end right around here. When I get to here, I'm just going to pull everything back and push that zipper pull in towards the window. And if you have the zipper pull facing towards the top of the zipper, you can simply just push it with your fingers and it'll go right in, just like that. I'm stitching around the box with a stitch length of 3.0. And when I get to the corner, I'll stop with the needle down and pivot. And then I will back stitch over that area right there. And sew across the other side. And around here is where I'll stop, and I'll just push everything back, and you have your zipper pull right there. I'm just going to push it with my finger. If you need to lift up your presser foot, you can do that. And now I can continue on. I need to take one more stitch. And then I'll finish by sewing over those first stitches. And back stitch. And here's what it looks like from the lining side. After I sewed around the zipper box, I just turn this over and I put the lining panels right sides together, and I sewed about a half of an inch away from each side. When I sew these sides, I like to have this on the bed of the machine just like this and sew straight down. You can just hold this piece out of the way. And then you just want to go ahead and trim off this excess right down here. Now we're working on the interior slip pocket. So you want to take that piece and you're simply going to fold it in half, and you're going to clip all along the length. Once you have it clipped, you'll sew a seam 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.5, and I'm sewing that off camera. After sewing that seam, I pressed it open, and now we're going to turn this pocket right side out. Then after you have that turned, you'll go ahead and press this all nicely again, and you want to top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the folded edge. So you're not doing your top stitching from the seam side, you're doing it from the folded edge side. Here's my interior slip pocket with my line of top stitching. I used a stitch length of 3.0. Now we can place this on the panel, on the lining panel. So I marked a line 2 inches down from this top, and I'm going to take the slip pocket and line the top of the slip pocket with that line. You'll place in some pins, and we're going to sew down the side, across the bottom, and up this side. And we're going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from all of these edges. And in addition to that, you want to find the center of the slip pocket. So I marked a line right here that goes straight down the center, and we're going to sew right on that line as well. I'm going to sew the slip pocket in with a stitch length of 3.0, and I am going to backstitch. And I'll pivot. And then next I'm going to sew right down the center of the pocket. And I'm going to backstitch a few times at each end. I'm working on the main zipper closure, and I have the 4 pieces that I need for the zipper closure. I've marked in 3/8 of an inch from each end with my chalk wheel, and I've also marked in 3/8 of an inch on the wrong side of the fabric. I like to have the markings on both sides when I do this. Then I also have my zipper here. It's a YKK zipper. It's a lot longer than it needs to be, and I'm going to leave it uncut right now because I want to put a zipper end on here, but I don't have one on hand, so I'm just going to leave it as it is for right now. The first thing that you want to do is take your zipper, and we're not going to cut anything off. We're just going to leave it just the way it came to us. And I'm going to take the top end right here, and I'm going to fold it back. So basically what I'm doing is I'm folding the zipper right where the hardware is at the top. That's the zipper stop right there. And then I'm going to take the end of it and bring it up to that fold. So it should look just like that. And then you want to go ahead and baste this in place. And I'm going to go do that off the camera. You can do this either on a sewing machine if you feel confident enough, or you could just take a needle and thread and baste it together that way. Now I have the ends of the zipper basted down. This is what it looks like from the back side, and I realize it's a little difficult because it's black thread on the black zipper, but that's about what it should look like. Now what you want to do is take one of these bang closure pieces, and you're going to clip this to one of the pieces, and you don't want the edge of the zipper to extend past that chalk mark. So line it up, and you'll start clipping everything in place. and clip it all along the entire length. Now, in the instructions, it says to go ahead and turn this end back. I don't like to do that. I like to keep mine open, and the reason why is because if I don't fold everything perfectly, I don't get an even edge. So I like to sew everything in, and then when I have the other side sewn in, I'll turn both of these back and make sure that they're exactly where they should be. But we'll see that in a little bit. So once you have this clipped, you're going to go ahead and sew it with a 1/4 inch seam all along the zipper tape. Make sure that all of your edges stay even, but don't sew past this 3/8 inch mark. You want to stop a little bit before that. And I'm going to do mine off camera. I have one side of the zipper sewn onto one of the main closures. If you look at it from this side, you can see that I stopped right before this 3/8 inch mark. And I also started right before this 3/8 inch mark, and that's where the zipper pull is, right there. So now what you'll do is just open this a little bit and take another one of the main closures and put it right sides together with this main closure, and the zipper will be sandwiched in between. So you're going to clip this all the way down the length. After you have that clipped into place, what you should have is a main panel with the zipper in between, and then a main panel on the opposite side of the zipper. And now when you sew, you're going to start from this end right here. This is the end where the zipper pull is. You're going to sew up this seam right here where you see this 3/8 inch mark. Then you'll pivot and you'll stitch right along your previous line of stitching, and you want to stop exactly in the same spot that you stopped before. And again, I'm going to do that off camera. I've completed that stitching, and notice that this is the end where the zipper is trailing off, and I did not sew this closed yet. This is still open. So I sewed straight along the top edge, then I pivoted and sewed down the side here, and this is the side where the zipper pull is when it's closed. So now I'm just going to go ahead and trim that seam down. And then you can turn this. You can get yourself a point turner and finish off that seam nicely. And we are eventually going to finish this too, but we're not going to do that until we have the other side of the zipper sewn in with the main panel. So you want to go ahead and sew in the main panel on the opposite side exactly the way we did this one here. All of my main closure pieces are sewed into the zipper, and now if you look here at the ends, you can see that they're not even across. That's why I don't fold everything back 1/2 inch or however much they tell you to before I sew in the zipper. So now what I can do is I can play with this, and I can get all of my edges to be even. And I want the edges, so I want these edges to be even with each other, and I want these edges to be even with everything on this side. So let's just fold back a little bit here. And of course you're going to play with this and tuck everything very nicely, like this seam needs to be pushed in here. Now when I fold this one back, I'm going to fold it so that it's even with this side. I'll put a clip in there, and then I'll fold this one back so that it's even. And now when I look at them, they're more in line with each other. I do need to play with this some more, so I'll fiddle with that. And then once you're done getting everything to look nice and even, you're going to run a top stitch along these three edges right here, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edges, and then you'll baste right across the bottom here. When you have your main closure zipper done, you can go ahead and clip it to the lining panel that has the zippered pocket. And you want to make sure that it's centered. And the way I like to make sure that it's centered is I just take my ruler and measure from side to side, and I want to have the same measurement on both sides from the edge of the closure to the edge of the panel. Once you have this clipped into place, go ahead and sew it with a 1/4 of an inch seam, and I'm going to sew that with a stitch length of 2.5 off camera. I have this clipped into place and I'm ready to sew, but I just want to point out that your zipper pull should be facing up, and it should be on the same side as the zipper pull on your zippered pocket. Now I have this all stitched into place. There's my 1/4 inch seam. So next I'll take the lining top and I'll clip that right sides together with my lining panel here. And you're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam all the way across. And when you do, you can follow your previous line of stitching, but you want to sew all the way out from edge to edge. And again, I'll go do that off camera with a stitch length of 2.5 and a seam allowance of 1/4 of an inch. I have that top lining piece stitched on now, so the next thing that you want to do is press it up with your seams facing towards the top, and you're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge here. Now that that's done and my top stitching is in place, I can go ahead and take the panel that has the slip pocket in it, and we're going to pin this other side of the main closure to the top of the panel with the slip pockets. So I'm just going to take it this way. Remember, you want your zipper facing up, and you're going to center it. And when you're doing this one, you also want to make sure that your side edges here are even. That's another way to know that everything is centered properly. So I'm going to clip this in place and sew it off camera, and when you're done with that, you'll go ahead and sew the top lining panel to the other side of this closure. Then you'll press all of your seams up towards the top and do the top stitching on this side. Now we're going to get started on the center divider zippered pocket. First thing that you want to do is cut your zipper to length. I'm using a number 5 zipper, and I'm installing my zipper tabs exactly the way I did for the exterior zippered pocket. And actually this pocket is constructed pretty much the same way as the zippered pocket on the exterior of the bag. So I cut my zipper tabs 1 1/4 inches wide, the same width of the zipper tape, and then I sew the tab on with a 1/2 inch seam. After it's sewn on, I pull it back this way. I fold in the edge of the tab to meet the edge of the zipper, and then I fold everything back, and then I go ahead and do my top stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper. And I've already done this end here. After your zipper is prepared with the tabs on it, you want to put the zipper face down to the right side of the fabric and clip it right along that top edge there, making sure that everything is centered. Then once it's centered and clipped into place, sew it with a 1/4 of an inch seam and a stitch length of 2.5. After you have the zipper stitched into place with the 1/4 of an inch seam, go ahead and take another zippered panel, put it right sides together with this panel here with the zipper in between, clip all along the edge, and then you're going to go ahead and stitch these layers together following that previous line of stitching, but this time you're going all the way out to the edge. So start at one edge and end at the other edge. Next, you're going to open this up and you're going to put the wrong sides together. And you want to press everything really well along the zipper edge. And after you have it all pressed nicely into place, you're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch right along this edge here. And then you're going to take the other two panels and you're going to clip them to this side of the zipper. And when you do, make sure that your edges are even. So go ahead and clip. Make sure that you have the same distance on each side of the zipper also. So you'll stitch in this panel with the 1/4 of an inch seam, and when you're done stitching that in, you'll take the other panel, clip that in, and stitch everything with the 1/4 of an inch seam. And again, you can follow the stitching line that you create when you sew in this side of the panel. I just finished sewing those 2 panels to the opposite side of the zipper, so this is what you should have now. You should have 2 of the lining pieces on this side and 2 of the pocket lining pieces on this side with wrong sides facing each other and the zipper here in the middle. So now, as I said before, you want to press everything back very nicely, and then you're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from each one of these edges. When you're done top stitching, you'll put everything together this way, so you have your 2 panels here and your 2 panels here. They're all going to come together, and you're going to make sure everything lines up, all your edges are even, and you're going to baste all the way around with a seam width of 1/8 of an inch. And this is exactly how we did the exterior pocket, so same thing, just a different shape. Here's the completed divider pocket. Everything has been top stitched. I've basted around, and if you look inside, you can see the inner pocket there. We can now sew our lining gussets together. So you want to take an A piece and a B piece and place them right sides together, and you're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam at the wider end. So you have this curved end up here where it's a little more narrow. This is the side that you want to sew the 1/4 inch seam at, and this is going to be the center bottom of the gusset. After you sew that, you want to press that seam open. So I have this one here, it's already been pressed open, and you want to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. So on each side of the seam, stitch 1/8 of an inch away. Now, as I said, you have a curved end and a straight edge. So all along here, you have the straight edge, and the straight edge is what we're going to clip to the pocket, the interior zippered pocket. So you'll take your interior zippered pocket, and you want to find the center of it, and I've indicated mine with a little notch. That's my center right there. I've also clipped in a little bit to help ease in this gusset. So I'm just simply going to take my gusset and I'm going to place it right sides to the pocket, and I'm going to match up the center seam here and my notch. So I'm just going to take my clips and start clipping up each side. I do like to start with a clip on each side of my notch first. And you want to make sure that you press that curve right into your gusset there. And then clip. So continue clipping up the first side, then you'll go ahead and clip up the other side. And when you're done, this is going to extend past the top of the pocket. You want to make sure that the amount that it's extending past the pocket is the same on both sides. I have the gusset clipped in to the zippered pocket. I found that the tops here extend 3 1/4 inches above the zippered pocket. Now I have a lot of clips in the curve here. You have to really try and maneuver this through the sewing machine so that you don't get any puckers. These clips, the depth of them is 1/2 of an inch, which is the same as our seam allowance. So if you don't have any puckers right where the tip of the clip is right here, you shouldn't get any puckers, but you're going to have to go slowly and just really maneuver the fabric around so that you work any puckers out of there that might happen. Now if you do get a pucker, don't worry about it. Just keep going, because you can usually unstitch that area and ease that pucker in. So we'll go over to the sewing machine now and sew this together. I'm going to do it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance as opposed to the 1/4 inch seam allowance, which the instruction says to do, but I am going to use a basting stitch, so I'll probably use a stitch length of about 4.0. And if there's ever a time when you're not feeling confident about just sewing something in permanently, you always have the option of basting, and basting is really not that hard to unsew. Now I'm going to be going slowly, and I'm not going to take any clips out until I absolutely have to, because those clips are holding everything right where it should be. Now, as I get to this area here, you want to manipulate the fabric around to ease out any of those puckers. And you want to try and keep all of your edges even. So I'm really just very gently coaxing the fabric out of the way to avoid a pucker. Once you get past the curve, you can go a little faster. And then you'll just work your way around the other curve the same way. So here's how we did. You can see I don't have any puckers in my curves. They're nice smooth curves. And we can take a look at what it looks like on the other side. So you can see everything is nice and smooth in there. These marks right here, those are just some marks that I put in because I didn't want to clip past my seam line. They'll come out when I iron. I also put some clip marks into the gusset as well as the zipper pocket right here. And those clips also help ease everything in. The biggest thing about putting in a gusset with curves like this is patience. You need to really take your time to clip everything, not just the little snips that we put into the fabric, but I mean clip with the Wonder Clips. So take your time clipping everything together. Manipulate the fabric as you go around the curves. Don't take out any of your Wonder Clips until you absolutely have to. Make sure that your edges stay even. Those are all really important things to getting a nice smooth curve without any puckers. So now that we have this side of the gusset sewn in, we're going to flip this over, and you want to take the other gusset and you're going to clip the straight edge to the pocket just like you did on the other side. You can make some clips in the gusset around where the curves are going to be. And then when you stitch this in, you can actually follow this line of stitching over here. I have the opposite side of the gusset clipped in now, but I'm actually going to sew it from this side, and I want to follow my previous line of stitching. But as I'm stitching, I'm going to be reaching under and pulling this side of the gusset out like this as I sew, and that should ensure that I don't get any puckers. So we can go over to the sewing machine and sew in this side of the gusset. I'm ready to start sewing again, and this time I'm stitching with a stitch length of 3.0. And you just want to stay on that previous line of stitching. And as I get to the curve, I'll just reach under, and I want to pull my bottom gusset in such a way that it straightens it out. So from underneath it looks like I'm doing this. And I am going very slowly, as you can see. You can kind of tell, and you can kind of feel this way. If there was a big pucker under there, you'd feel it. So I'm just making sure that it's all flat under there, and I can also feel with my finger. So just keep working your way around now until you get to the other side. I have the other side of the gusset sewn into place now. I got a nice smooth curve again, and you can see it here from this side. Everything is laying in there very nicely. So now I can go ahead and trim these seams down. And again, I don't want to trim all the way up to the top. So I just make a little cut in on each side, a couple of inches down from the top there. And then once I've done that, then I'm just going to trim this seam allowance to 1/4 of an inch. You want to make sure that you don't catch the gusset on the other side. Make sure everything is laying flat against the pocket. I can now sew the gussets into the front and back lining pieces. So the part with the slip pocket and the interior pocket. And when I do this, I want to make sure that my zipper pulls are on the same end for both the zipper pocket and the center zippered pocket. And you'll start by pinning the top sides together with some clips, and then you want to match up your centers. So I have the center marked on this panel here. You'll match up those centers and then match up the other top sides just like this. Then you're going to clip all the way down towards the curve and ease in the curve. And you can go ahead and pin in both sides if you want to. So you would bring down the slip pocket side, and that would get pinned to this side of the gusset. You just want to leave an opening somewhere at the bottom to turn everything. I have the gussets clipped into both the front and back of the bag. I am making sure that my zipper pulls will all be in the same position when they're closed. So here's the zipper pull for the main closure, and when that's closed it'll be on this end. The zipper for my zippered pocket, that middle section, will also be on this side, and the zipper pull for my interior zippered pocket will all be on this side. So all my zippers, when closed, the zipper pulls will be on this end. Now, since I'm going to be berthing the bag through the bottom of the bag, I need to leave an opening. So I'm leaving my opening on the side of the bag that has the zippered pocket. And the reason why is because I will eventually be closing up the hole in the bottom through this pocket. So I want to have the opening for berthing and the opening for closing up the lining on the same side. When you're sewing this together, you're going to start out with a seam width of 1/2 of an inch for a few inches, and then you'll increase that seam width to about 5/8 of an inch. And you'll stop where the opening is on each side. And then on this side of the bag, same thing. You're starting out with a 1/2 inch seam. You'll go into a 5/8 inch seam all around because you're not leaving the bottom here open. So you'll sew completely around here. I am going to be sewing this off camera because you're going to be sewing this in exactly the same way as you did when you sewed the gusset to that middle zippered pocket. And it's also the same way that you sewed in your front and back exterior to your exterior gusset. So just go slow. I'll be stitching with a stitch length of 2.5 inches. Now I have the gussets completely sewn into place. I've already gone ahead and trimmed down my seams. So I like to keep the ones up here at the full 1/2 inch. And then I just clipped in and trimmed everything to 1/4 of an inch. And you can see here how my seam went in around the curve. I didn't get any puckers. That's actually not a pucker, it's just a little crease there. And on this side, when you sew, remember that you need to keep the bottom open. And I don't trim that seam allowance right there. I leave it at the full 5/8 of an inch at the bottom. So now we can start assembling the bag. I'm going to take the exterior of my bag now, and I need to stuff it inside of the lining. It is a little cumbersome because you got this middle pocket here, but it's definitely doable. Now I want this zippered pocket right here to be facing the back of the bag. So I'm simply going to hold on to this pocket right here and then just stuff the exterior inside. You want to push it all the way down. Just get in there and push it down into the lining. Then once you have that stuff down there far enough, you're just going to start clipping your top edges together. You want to match up all of the seams, so all of the side seams for the gussets. I do like to put a clip on both sides of the seam. You can either open this one up here. This is the center of the lining gusset. So either open that up completely or just fold it to one side. And here's the other side seam for the gusset. And then you're just going to clip all around the top of the bag. And here's my lining and my exterior all clipped together. Again, I used a lot of clips. I did open up all of these seams here and clip those flat. So we can go ahead and sew it now. I'm going to be sewing from the inside of the bag, and I'll be sewing with a stitch length of 3.0. I'll start sewing around here. Now my stitch length is 3.0 and my stitch width is 1/2 an inch. Make sure that all the hardware that you have for the connector straps and everything, make sure that that's all tucked down. You don't want to hit any of that hardware when you're sewing. And just go slow. You can backstitch if you want. You don't have to. You can do it at the end if you prefer. When you get towards the ends, you can start manipulating everything. And now that I'm back to where I began, I'll just stitch over that original stitching just a little bit and backstitch. Next, just check the top seam, make sure it looks good on both sides, and then you can go ahead and trim it to 1/4 of an inch. Now we can birth the bag. So where you have that opening, you're just going to pull that lining over the exterior. Don't pull too hard, be gentle because you don't want to rip out any of your stitching. Once you have the lining pulled through, you may think that something's wrong because your middle pocket, your middle zippered pocket, is on the outside. But don't worry, because once you push the lining inside of the bag, it's going to right itself. So push your lining down in. Smooth everything out with your hands, and then you'll see that your middle pocket is exactly where it should be, right in the middle there. Now go ahead and smooth down your lining really well. Then you want to go ahead and pull the lining down. You'll roll all of your seams so that the seam is laying right at the top. And you want to put in clips. And go ahead, clip everything into place, and then we can do our top stitching. The top of the bag is all clipped and ready for my top stitching, and I'm just going to use a stitch length of 4.0. And I'm stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I'm stitching from the inside of the bag, and this is pretty much what we did when we sewed the exterior to the lining. You also want to make sure that all of that hardware is out of the way. You don't want to hit any of that hardware with your needle. As you come to the ends of the bag, just readjust and keep on stitching all the way around. My top stitching is done. I could have been straighter about my stitching, but it's really difficult when you're working around the camera. So now, just to finish everything up, you want to open up the main closure and then open up your zippered pocket. And now remember, we left an opening at the bottom there. So you're going to reach through the bottom of that pocket, and you want to pull the lining up through the pocket. So just grab onto it, and then after you pull it through, find that opening that you left, and you're going to go ahead and stitch that closed. So here's that opening. Just go ahead and stitch across with a 5/8 inch seam. After you have that stitched in place, just go ahead and finish trimming down that seam to 1/4 of an inch. And then you can tuck it back down through that pocket lining. Just smooth everything out in there. And then you'll take the pocket, the zippered pocket lining, and you want to turn under your seams to 1/4 of an inch and stitch everything closed. To close up the pocket lining, I just turned the ends under 1/4 of an inch, and then I stitched 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And then you can go ahead and tuck that back in place. The last thing left to do is to construct our handles and our shoulder strap. So this is my shoulder strap right here. I have interfaced it with some Pellon 911F, and I did do it along the whole width, but you do want to keep it out of the seam allowance over here. So you're going to take this piece and fold it in half all along the length, and you're going to press it really well. And then after you've done that, you're going to take your long edges and fold them right into that center. And then you'll press that really well. And once you've done that, you'll fold everything so that these folded edges are together. And then you'll clip everything in place. And you're going to top stitch all along the edge. So top stitch 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch away from each edge. I used a stitch length of 4.0. Now I've already made my handles, and here's one of them right here, and I did finish off the ends. So you'll have a nice finished edge. I'm not going to show you how to do that, but I will link to a video that does show you how to do that. And then here I have one of the handles attached. I just have them in place with some Wonder Clips, and then I'll go ahead and put in some rivets. And remember, I have my extra long zipper here because I'm waiting for my zipper end to come in. Well, here's the bag, almost completed, with the exception of finishing my shoulder strap and putting in my rivets. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. I've certainly enjoyed putting it together for you. And I'd like to give a shout out to all of you who have liked my videos and subscribed to my channel. I really, truly do appreciate your support. And if you're not already a subscriber, I would definitely love to have you as one. So please like and subscribe. And thanks for watching.